Now, when I first started this mix, I was having a real hard time. I was having a really hard time because what I thought it should sound like as I moved stuff around, and especially as I pulled the vocal off the front wall, it didn't sound like what I thought it should. And I was very confused by this. Let's do this. What's up, everybody? In this video, I have to read off my notes here. In this video, we're going to talk about my first Atmos mix in this room. I want to talk about how I did it. I want to talk about some routing. I want to talk about how long it took, which is interesting. I want to talk about a few things that I learned not to do. I want to talk about how the translation was to headphones and binaural. I want to talk about my favorite reference songs for Atmos. I want to talk about how I can send this to clients so they can listen to it, and I want to tell you what song it actually was. We have got a lot to cover in this video. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, I'm Cool Caparoon. Thank you for stopping by for another video. If you can't tell, I'm in a great mood because that was so much fun. It was so inspiring. It was so much more emotionally intense. I absolutely love this format. Now, there will be a video coming very soon on how we tuned this whole rig, but this is part of the tuning process. We did a bunch of hours of tuning the whole system using the Avid Matrix Studio, and now I have to work. I need to listen a whole bunch. I want to mix a handful of songs at least and make sure the translation is what I need it to be, and then we will tweak some more stuff. So if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe so you see that video when it comes out. And also, I'm gonna put a bunch of this stuff on my other YouTube channel. If you don't know, I have another YouTube channel called Cool Caparoon Tech, and I'll put a link down below. But there's a whole bunch of super technical stuff that I want to do videos on, because the information needs to be out there. However, if I do that on this channel, I'm just gonna burn my algorithm to the ground and you're never even gonna see any more of my videos again. So hit the link in the description, go check out and subscribe to the other YouTube channel where we're gonna get into a whole bunch of like nerdy routing stuff, nerdy tuning stuff, some mix tips for Atmos that maybe don't quite garner a big full production like this video. But anyway, go check that out. Okay, so the first thing that is interesting about this is that I can feel myself falling back into my obsessive era. When I was in my early 20s, mid 20s, I was so obsessed with recording and with mixing that it was all I could think about. It was all I could focus on. I just wanted to go, 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 go. And it was so common, because the studio didn't have any windows, it was so common for me to just lose all track of time and be like, what time is it? And it's like 6 a.m. and I've been there for 14 hours. Like, that happened all the time. I can feel myself falling back into that, which is interesting because I'm not sure I expected that to happen. This is such a deep format, and I'm not used to feeling like a newbie. I'm not trying to be cocky about it. I've been mixing records and producing artists for over 20 years now. And so, you know, there's always new stuff to try out. We always try to keep it fresh and try to do new and fresh things. But when you're working on 150 to 200 songs a year forever, for decades, you know, there's not a whole lot to continue figuring out. It's little refinements here and there. This is brand new, and it feels brand new, and it feels like I have no idea what I'm doing. So because of that, I'm not gonna do any mix tutorials on Atmos for a while. I wanna do 30 to 100 songs and really wrap my head around it. I wanna be able to tell you guys how I do things and then tell you why I do them and be 100% confident that I'm giving you good information. Now, I am gonna go into how I did stuff in this video, but I don't want you to take it as advice. I don't want you to take it as I'm telling you how to mix in Atmos, because I'm real new at this. So the first thing that I have to talk about and that I have to give credit to is my friend Mike Miller, who unfortunately passed away a few months ago. If you scroll back on the channel, there's a video that I did with him, an interview that I did with him. He mixed Harry Styles and Macklemore and Lil Nas X, J-Lo, like a ton of enormous records in Atmos. And he's one of, if not the best Atmos mixers so far to date. His stuff is absolutely my favorite, and we're going to get into Atmos to references, my reference picks. But it was such a huge loss. He was so talented and so kind, and I feel really lucky that I got to spend 3 days with him at Sweetwater in their Atmos studio. And he taught me more in those 3 days than any other human has about audio production in my life. It was an unbelievable experience, and Mike is going to be missed greatly. Now, for those 3 days that I got to spend with Mike, I was just typing on my phone constantly. Everything that he said, every idea he put forth, every concept that he showed us, I just documented as much of it as I possibly could. And the fact that I got through this first mix in the way that I did, and with the translation that I did, which again, we'll get into all of that, huge credit to Mike and to what he taught us in that class. He took many months off of my learning curve, and I feel really fortunate that I got to experience that. Okay, now something that I learned absolutely not to do, or I mean, you can do it, but I think this is important to know. So this is the panner right here, and you've got all this different stuff. You've got front and rear, you've got front and rear here, you've got height so you can raise it up off the floor, you've got how much center channel you want, and then you have this control called size. And basically, as I turn this knob up, you can see that a box forms around the object, and it takes up more and more size. And so I was like, oh, well, let's put some size on the effects, on the reverbs and stuff, just to make them take up more space. And so I was putting the reverbs from the vocals in the sides, literally in the sides, intentionally. So that way, that's where I wanted it for this particular background vocal. And then I was like, I had the size turned up to, I don't know, maybe up to 30 or something like that. And I was like, what's going on here? And I slid all the way over here, and I'm like, there's no reverb on that vocal coming out of this speaker. But I panned it so it would come out of that speaker. What's happening here? And so I started playing around with it, and what I realized is that if you go, so when the size is at 0 and you have something set where you want it to come out right there or whichever, it doesn't really matter. As soon as you start turning up size, as soon as you crack it open to 1, it starts spreading that sound out around speakers, which is fine because that makes sense. You want it's panned right here and you want it to be bigger. So as you increase the size, then it spreads out, which means there's going to be signal coming out the other speakers. Great, no problem. But if you put the size control above 10 and you have it panned right here, it actually begins turning it down here and putting way more of it in the speakers surrounding it. So from now on, I will never go above size 10 because then it starts getting weird with your panning. So that was one thing that I really did not expect that I learned very quickly. Size of 10 will forever be the maximum that I go, and I use 0 on most things, but on some effects, on some reverbs and stuff, it was kind of cool to crack it open to like a 3 or a 4, and that sounded pretty neat. Okay, first mix. On a principle level, I really want to fall into the zone when I'm mixing, and I've talked about this on the channel. When I'm mixing stereo, and apparently that's how I'm going to mix Atmos too, I fall into the zone and I just make moves quickly, very quickly, and getting into the zone and not overthinking things and not spending time experimenting when I'm actually mixing for a client on a song that's going to get released. This is really important to me. I've talked on the channel before how I think that we should experiment not in the moment. I think we should know all of our tools and play around with different techniques. And I think you should spend real time experimenting, but not when you're actually in the session working on a song to get released. You should have all of that ironed out. You should know exactly where you're trying to go with the song when you're actually mixing for a release. You should have the finish line in your mind and then work quickly to get the sound coming out the speakers to the finish line that you have in your head. I'm real adamant about that because that's how we keep our perspective fresh. That's how we make good mix decisions because we're working quickly and not getting burnt out mentally or our ears. So this first mix was about experimentation for me. This was not something this was a song that came out a year and a half ago that I produced. And the reason why I chose this song is because I had already printed all the stems for Atmos for it. And someone else, Matt McClure, did the Atmos mixes. And that Atmos mix is out. The song is South Dakota Sky by Matt Rogers. And again, I produced it, played most of the instruments on it. Smith Curry played on it. Lester Estelle played on it. And it's a great song. It's a great production, kind of sparse production, which I thought would be cool to really wrap my head around this stuff. So there was no pressure for me to get this done for a client and make sure that I was hitting all of my marks right out of the gate, because this mix that I just did will never get released. I will have it here to show people, but it will never get released. And I specifically chose this song so I could experiment, so I could take my time, get my workflow figured out, find the locations in the three-dimensional space that I like for different things, learn how to automate, learn how to set up routing, all of this stuff. So there's a couple things that I want to make sure that I touch on when Josh comes back, and I need to experiment. I want to experiment. Can I get all the height speakers in one shot? Not really. I want to experiment and play around with the angle of these height speakers. I kind of want to sit at a bunch of different heights and put stuff only in the height speakers and just kind of see how that feels and what height it feels the best from the height speakers. Because I'm not 100% convinced that these are steep enough. I feel like they're pointing just a bit low, but I want to play around with it just in case. It's just the thoughts that I had after mixing. Now, when I first started this mix, I was having a real hard time. I was having a really hard time because what I thought it should sound like as I moved stuff around, and especially as I pulled the vocal off the front wall, it didn't sound like what I thought it should. And I was very confused by this because we had double and triple checked all of our routing, all of our patch points, that every speaker was coming out, the sound for every specific speaker was coming out the appropriate speaker. And I was like, what is happening? Why is this not working? Well, this is the first time I had worked in Pro Tools on this rig, and we had the wide speakers, the left and right wides, and these front height speakers flip-flopped. They were backwards. And so as I would pull the vocal off the front wall and it would go from the left and right, and it should transition to the wide and then to the sides, it just was feeling odd. Like it didn't feel like it was moving past me. Well, it's because it was going from the left and right front speaker as I pulled it off to the height speakers and then to the side speakers. Once I flipped that, and it took me an hour to figure out that that's what was happening. Once I flipped that, I was like, oh, we're good now. So that was the first setback that would have not been what I wanted to happen when I'm mixing for a client. The other thing that I didn't really expect is that when I was panning stuff around, like in the song that I was working on, I had the organ. We did a B3 with a Leslie, and it sounds unreal, but I wanted it in the rear speakers. And one thing that I've never experienced before is that I was like, that sounds kind of odd. Why does that sound odd? It's because the rear speakers, I could hear them bouncing off the front window. And so I'm gonna have to figure out how I want to handle that. Do I just want to keep the soundproof curtain up at all times? Do I just want to deal with it? It just is what it is, because I've talked about this in other videos. Having natural daylight, like looking outside, does so much for my mental state and for my stamina, for how many hours I can sit in this chair. So, but it was always an extremely minimal compromise with just the left and right. But now that we have speakers literally firing at the window, I'm going to have to experiment with this and see how I want to handle it. So the speed of the mix, it went extraordinarily slow. Even after I got this Pro Tools issue figured out, it took a long time because I was learning where I liked to pan stuff, especially in this room. This rig sounds unbelievable. and the room sounds unbelievable. It's one of the best Atmos experiences I've had, and I've sat in and worked in 7 or 8 rooms now, and it's just shockingly good in here. But I can hear things with such precision that I really wanted to dial in, like the coordinates. For instance, I was like, okay, where do I pan stuff on the panner to get it just coming out the wides? That's at 68. Where do I pan stuff to just get it in the sides? That is 0. And one of the things that Mike Miller taught us in this class, which makes perfect sense, is you're no longer looking at a spectrum from left to right. The left to right is now your left and right sides. And the stereo spectrum is a giant U that wraps around you. So that is the approach that I took, that left and right in the sides is now my actual left and right. So the guitar that I want on the left and the guitar that I want on the right, they are directly on my left and right. So lots of time spent working that out. Now, if you want a lot of movement in your Atmos mix, so far, unless I'm missing something, which I don't think that I am, there's kind of 2 ways to go about doing it. There is the traditional in Pro Tools, drawing lines or creating points with the hand tool and literally just drawing in automation, how I've always done it. Then there's the Dolby Atmos panner, with which you can create certain movements and then you have to print those off to Pro Tools automation. Both of these are extremely time consuming and pretty cumbersome because you're panning inside of a 3-dimensional space. You're no longer just left to right. And so there's many, many lanes of automation, and it took a long time. It took a long time to program things to move around. It will get way faster as I can just open it up and know which lanes do what, but it took a long time. Now, I only set up automation on one thing, and that was on a particular cymbal swell. Let's see, where's my cymbal swells at? So that was like on these cymbal swells right here. And so if I just open up all the lanes of automation here, like you can see how many lanes of automation that actually is. And so what we're doing here is I'm just pulling that from the back of the room to the front of the room and back as the cymbal swell happens. And so you can kind of get a visual representation over here in the Dolby panner. Let me find, or in the Dolby renderer. Now I can't play very much of this because I'll get a copyright strike, but if you watch, you can see all of these objects in here. These are all the different things happening in the mix. This is a person's head. So as you can see, this is like, there you're facing forward, and so you're sitting in the room like this basically. But I like to watch it like this so you can really see some stuff. So you'll see some objects right here that go to the front of the room and then right back, and that is the cymbal swell. Not sure what this will even sound like on camera, but here we go. So those right there, that is the cymbal swell moving forward and backward. And that was really the only automation I did in this song. This song felt like it needed to be fairly static, but just kind of spread out around the room. Now, most of the work, most of the time I spent was just finding the locations, the actual coordinates where I like everything, where I think it sounds best for what suits the song and physically, literally sounding the best. But then the majority of the time was spent reviving tracks that the stems from the stereo mix. And the reason is, and I've talked about this in other videos, the reason is because in stereo, we are trying to cram however much stuff in a left to right spectrum. It's just this. And Chris Lord-Alge, I think, painted the best picture with this when he was talking about parking spots. You've got your drums, all your different drums. You've got your bass and your guitars and your keys and your synthesizers and your pianos and your vocal harmonies and all your effects and everything. You're trying to cram everything in this spectrum, and it's like a row of parking spots. And you have to kind of carve stuff up to fit into every single parking spot, so that way it actually works in the stereo spectrum. But with Atmos, we don't have to worry about that nearly as much. So that guitar that I cut up so that way it would not step on the vocal, I just put it here. And for the most part that works. But because I just put it here, now it sounds kind of thin and kind of anemic because I carved it up so it didn't step on the vocal. And so the only EQ work that I did, kind of the only actual like mixing that I did was getting the life back into those tracks. whatever frequencies that I cut out so it wouldn't step on the vocal, I need to bring those back now. And somehow, I know there's going to be comments about this, somehow in the fold down, even with all the tracks brought back to life, they don't step on each other in the fold down in headphones. I don't know how it happens, but a good mix, when the Atmos mix is good, then it sounds great still. So here is the first song that I mixed in this room. As you can see, they are all on objects and they are all on near. Now this was a Mike Miller method. This is what he swore by, and I trust him because his mixes were unbelievable. The only thing that is in the bed is the LFE. And so what you basically do, again, I'm not trying to tell you guys how you should do it, but you create an aux for an LFE, and then you put the output of that aux to the actual bed, and then you run buses running to that aux. And so that's how you get stuff in the LFE. That's how many plugins I had. That's the whole session right there. So, you know, there's quite a bit going on the close drum rooms here because I wanted them to be a specific vibe, and I didn't really use them in the stereo mix. And then you can see, let's see here, we've got some K clip here and there. That's an awesome clipper. There's a bunch of instances of this Toop plugin. I absolutely love this for saturation. It just brings like mid-range into it, and like it just kind of pulls everything closer to you a little bit. So I really like that. And then the reverb that I was using is the FabFilter Pro R in this setting. But overall, fairly straightforward. So I spent a lot of time adding some saturation, adding different EQ to like bring the fullness of each track back. And then I spent a fair amount of time clipping stuff. Again, this was something that Mike Miller showed us, where the transients, because you're not running through a mix bus and because it's not getting smashed with a limiter, you really, it helps a lot if you go through and use a clipper on stuff and clip individual elements, so that way the transients aren't so extreme. Because the transients on a tom or on a snare drum are pretty extreme if they're not being hit by that limiter at the end of the mix bus. And we're so accustomed to hearing that squash, to hearing that cut or that clip, that in my opinion, again, not telling anyone how to mix in Atmos, that's not what this video is about, but Mike Miller was really adamant about this, and I agreed with him in the moment, and now I really agree with him that I need to clip some of that. I need to reduce the dynamic range of like those drums, and like there was a dobro in this song, which is extremely dynamic instrument, and I needed to clip some of those down to reduce the dynamic range of those a little bit. The song still has insane dynamics, like absolutely insane, because we're not squashing it with a limiter, which is one of the beauties about Atmos. So that was what most of the work was done actually mixing. Again, I'm not trying to tell anyone how to do this yet. It's actually one of the things that drives me the most nuts about YouTube, is it's like as long as someone has some gear and a camera, they can talk to you like they know what you're doing. But I am adamant that you should only take advice from people that you like what they do. There's plenty of audio YouTubers here that are telling you what to think about things and how to feel about things and what to do and what not to do when it comes to audio and mixing and your career. And you've never heard any music that they've ever worked on. You've never even heard it. And that's crazy. That's absolutely insane to me. I'm not saying that they're wrong about everything. I'm just saying that, man, you really should seek out the people that you like what they do. There's a playlist down below, an Apple Music playlist of 30, 40 songs that I've worked on that I like. Go listen to them. If you like them, cool. Look up my profile, my credits on Muso AI, and listen to the songs. If you like them, awesome. Then maybe you can trust some of the stuff that I say. But if you don't like anything that I've ever done, you shouldn't be listening to me anyway. It's one of the things that drives me nuts about YouTube. It's so easy to just buy a camera and be enthusiastic and talk in a enthusiastic way, in a convincing way, and then people just believe you. I wish that wasn't the case. So I'm not telling anyone how to mix in Atmos when I'm a brand new Atmos mixer. Now, the creative side of the panning and the emotional side of this it's so much more emotional because there's so much more dynamics. There's so much more transient. The big moments of the song are so much bigger that it's just so much more emotional. Now, I did rely heavily on the panning coordinates that Mike Miller gave us in the class. I may talk about them one day. I need to get 30 or 100 songs into this before I start instructing people on what to do. So the reverb that I was using is the FabFilter Pro R. It is the only 914 reverb that I have at the moment. I really want to check out the Seventh Heaven reverb from Liquid Sonics. I think that's next. I'm probably going to pick that up later today. I didn't really need a lot of reverb because most of the stems that I had printed a dry take and then a completely wet take. So that way I had a dry and 100% wet of the vocal, of the background vocal. So that way I could really just kind of play around with that and have the exact effects that were in the song to begin with. But there was a couple elements, like I did sprinkle a little 914 reverb on the dobro and on the acoustic guitar because it just felt good. Now, the one thing that I did that there seems to be a lot of debate on is I used 100% objects. Nothing was in the bed except the LFE, and all of the objects were set to near. Again, this was a Mike Miller thing. This is what he swore by, and his mixes are my favorite. So we'll get on to that shortly. So I just did that, and turned out great. Now, how I found the exact coordinates is to, like, if I only want it in the wides or I only want it in the sides, is I was just looking at my Dadman software and you could see all the outputs simultaneously, and I would just move the panner around until it was only in a specific pair of speakers that I wanted it in. Now, I don't think you should look at Atmos as a specific set of speakers. It's a three-dimensional space. Just like in stereo, you don't look at it as two speakers. It's a spectrum from left to right. And I think it's important to not get locked into looking at Atmos as a set number of speakers, that you should just pan stuff around and find what feels good, or at least that's what I was doing. But there was a couple things that, like the shaker in this song. Let's get on to the translation of the mix. The shaker in the song, it felt a bit weird in the headphones, and I'm pretty sure it's because of where I had it panned. And so I need to play around with that, and I need to find the spots where I like that stuff the most and the spots where I find that stuff the least. What I need to do is just start playing around with different panning locations and then check it in the cans. And how does it feel? And I'm gonna find spots that I like that stuff, and there's gonna be spots that I don't really like. Experimentation, I think, is a huge key. Now, I will say that I put absolutely nothing in the center channel. There is a little bit of the reverb from the 914 reverb in the center channel, but I didn't put anything in the center channel, and I need to experiment with this and make sure that I can fully wrap my head around why. But most of my favorite mixes, the vast majority of them, when you look at the meters, there's almost nothing or literally nothing in the center channel. So I need to play around with that and really come to an understanding, come to a preference, so that way I can have a real opinion and explain why. Now, the translation of this mix, outside of that shaker thing, was very, very good, which I'm gonna credit Mike Miller for, honestly, because I used a lot of his information and a lot of the things that I learned in that class, and the fact that I was able to just take my very first mix and the translation was like, I mean, send it. Like, yes, I will tweak things and I would want it to be just a little bit better and more refined, but if that's my very first mix, let's go. I did send the mix to 2 people who have helped me out an enormous amount getting stuff set up and understanding routing. The first one is Shane Grush. I'll put a link to his channel down below because he goes over some more the nerdier side, more this technical side of mixing in Atmos, and he's very good at his videos and he's very knowledgeable, and he really helped me get some routing stuff set up so that way I could play Apple Music back and like get everything all worked out. And the other one is Sean Deely, who works at Sweetwater Studios, and he does most of the Atmos mixing in Studio B and Studio C at Sweetwater. So I sent the mix to both of them, and I feel very fortunate that they would both take the time to listen to it and give me some feedback, and the feedback was great. Sean was like, it might be a little bit bright, and I agree it might be, even though I didn't brighten stuff up. And then Shane said that he checked it on a bunch of stuff, and it sounded great. And so like 2 people that I really trust and I appreciate them taking the time to give me feedback on that, and to have two people confirm that, like, no, this sounds great. That was awesome. So there's two more things that I want to cover, and that is mixing Atmos and stereo simultaneously, and what my reference mixes are, my preferred reference mixes for Atmos. But first, there are links down below to my playlist. There are links down below to all the gear that I use. There's links down below to Sean and Shane, who I've used. There's links down below to Haverstick Designs, who helped me set all of this up. There's also links down below to all of the gear that I'm using. And those links go to Sweetwater. Sweetwater's sponsoring this video. So anytime you guys need any piece of musical gear whatsoever, you can jump on any one of my videos, click on any one of the links down below, and once you're on the site, you can purchase anything that you need that you were gonna buy anyway. It costs you nothing extra. But doing that helps me keep making videos like this. It helps me continue to teach and hopefully educate and hopefully entertain. And so if you use those links to purchase anything, it goes a long ways to support this channel and help what I'm doing here. So thank you guys so much for using those links anytime you need to purchase absolutely anything. Thank you, Sweetwater, for sponsoring this video. Okay, mixing in stereo and Atmos simultaneously. Long term, this is gonna be my goal. How I am going to try to work in the future is doing one mix for every song. I'm not 100% confident I'll be able to get there, so that way I'm 100% happy with the stereo mix doing it this way, but I'm gonna try real hard, and I'm 80% confident that I'll be able to do it. I did not try that in this mix because I just wanted to get my workflow figured out, get just used to the format, understand how to pan automate stuff, understand like what locations sound best, workflow, sending music to clients. That's something that I haven't talked about yet. How do I even send this to people so that way they can listen to it? So that way they can give me revision notes. So that was a whole process, and Shane helped me a ton with that. So what I'm doing currently is I am bouncing an ADM out of Pro Tools, the master file at 2448. And I've kind of gotten in this habit because when I'm mixing stereo through a whole bunch of hardware, if I print a mix to send to a client, it's always an MP3. But I also will always print the 2448 file with no limiter, so that way if the mix is approved, I already have the mix ready for mastering. So I don't ever have to do a recall because I never know what revision is going to get approved. 50% of the time my mix 1 gets approved. And so I've just gotten in a habit where I always print the file for mastering at the same time as the file that goes to the client for their approval or for them to send me revision notes. So I'm kind of approaching this exactly the same way. I print an ADM file so that way I have the file. An ADM file is the Atmos file for those that don't know. So that way I have the file ready to be mastered if the mix gets approved. And then I import that ADM into the Dolby renderer, and I'll do videos on all of this stuff eventually here. So I import that into the Dolby renderer, and then from the Dolby renderer, I export an MP4, which basically bakes all the metadata in, so that way nobody can remix anything, remaster anything, or pull stems apart. And then once I have that MP4, there's two options that I'm messing around with. There's Samply and From Smash, and those are the two that I've been playing around with on sending to clients. So either way, regardless, one is expensive and one is free. But anyway, you upload into that, and it's kind of like a WeTransfer. And then you send them the link, and then they can play it right from their iPhone as long as they have AirPod Pros or AirPod Maxes, and I think it does work with a select other number of headphones that I don't have the list for. But then they can listen to the binaural in their headphones, and then they can literally make notes in the app, or they can just text me notes of changes they would like to be made. So this is how I'm delivering this, and then when it comes time to actually send someone the mix or the master, then I can just upload an ADM file in Dropbox or Google Drive or WeTransfer or Samply or From Smash, and then send them that, and then they can download it and then upload it to their distributor. Okay, reference mixes. What are my favorite reference mixes? Now, Mike Miller actually has a playlist on Apple Music of a whole bunch of spatial audio Atmos mixes that he has done. Everything on there sounds absolutely incredible. So that is where I started. And then I just played around listening to different genres in Apple Music on the system, and I'll show this in a future video, or on the second channel. I've got it all rigged up so that way I can just play Apple Music, and if the song exists in Spatial, which is Apple's version of Atmos, it automatically plays back through the whole rig in Atmos, in Spatial audio. And so I just I've probably spent 10 or 12 hours listening and just going through and listening. And there are a couple songs that I have landed on that I think sound really, really good. The first song is Graveyard by Halsey. That's unreal. And the second song is Daydreaming by Harry Styles, which Mike Miller mixed. Those are hands down my favorite. In terms of the spatial elements, in terms of the space itself, in terms of how the vocal sounds, in terms of how the percussion sounds, how the low end hits, everything about those two is just, it's perfect. It's just perfect. Now there's a whole bunch more songs that are like a B-level reference for me, just one down. There's a song called Boom by Tiesto that is wild in terms of the low end and how everything swirls around you. That's a great reference. Some of the Imagine Dragons stuff is very, very cool. But really, Graveyard and Daydreaming, those are perfect songs and perfect mixes, in my opinion. The solo sixes, they sound awesome. The Focal solo sixes, it's just really good. I think that they were the right move to pair with the trios, because the trios are big and impressive and, let's be honest, expensive. It's just too much to do more than this everywhere, and especially for the height speakers. Like in a room this size, you wouldn't want to go with anything bigger. I'm really impressed with them. They sound really good. And like their sweet spot is nice and wide. The fact that they sound the way that they do, that we were able to line them up with the trios pretty well. Like they sound fairly similar. There's some differences between them for sure. But like the whole system just, it plays together really nice. I'm really, really happy. Now, this software is called Dadman, and this is the software that runs on the Avid Matrix Studio. So this is all of the outputs, every speaker output is coming right from there, and then built into that, so this software runs that, and then you can see if I'm on my 914 profile here, and then if I open up the EQ, you can see some of the EQ that we have on some of the channels, on some of the different speakers. I have about half of this inactive at the moment, but this is kind of the tuning that we did, and again, we'll go through all of that in a future video. So I just wanted to kind of walk you guys through, talk you through what my experience was like, and it's overwhelmingly a good one. I'm so excited to be working in this format. It's so inspiring. It's so creatively freeing. It's so much more emotionally intense. It's so awesome to be able to have big transients and not have to worry about smashing stuff with a limiter. I'm really, really pumped. Be sure to subscribe to this channel and the tech channel for upcoming videos. There will be a video coming on the tuning of this rig. We need to get all the way through the tuning process, which we're about halfway through right now, before I make that video and discuss how we tuned everything. So that's it. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.